Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News and a blessed Spiritual Baptist Liberation Day to you. Representing her faith on this day is mother, teacher, counselor, teacher Dierdre Mitchell. Welcome, teacher Dierdre. How are you doing?
I am well. I am happy to be here. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Very happy to be talking to you and asking you, how has preparations for the observance this year been versus the last two?
Oh, well, because of the pandemic, as we are all aware, preparation would have been a bit different in terms that, of course, we're not meeting physically. We would have had all of our meetings online via the Zoom platform. And this year is a big year because this year we celebrate 80 years actually of freedom, 80 years of worship, 80 years after much struggle and after much tribulation that we were triumphant and then able to worship freely now. So it has been a little bit different from the previous years, but again, because it's 80 years, we're making this thing happen. Everybody's coming together. Everybody in the diocese is coming together. You have all of the chapters that are coming together, Tobago chapter, Central chapter, even Grenada is coming on board in order for us to make this year, a grand celebration.
And what are some of those things that you think people get wrong or most wrong about the faith, even though there's so much time that has gone on from liberation? But what are some of those things that you think people still could get a little better?
In terms of misconceptions and things that people would get wrong about the faith, and you rightfully said, as time has elapsed and more information is out there, but a lot of people still tend to think that spiritual Baptists are not Christians. People tend to believe that we are evildoers, and if you understand what Christianity is, it is a broad spectrum. And so there are different religious organizations that make up the bracket of Christianity. And so Christians are Christ followers, and that we are as well. So for spiritual Baptists, we follow the principles and we follow the teachings of Christ, and therefore we are Christians. And of course, if you are Christian, then evil doing and Christianity cannot walk hand in hand. The Bible tells us that bitter and sweet, it cannot, it's a dogma really that bitter and sweet cannot flow from the same cup. You can't be hot and cold, you can't be lukewarm. And so for us, it's just one of the misconceptions that continues to follow the faith even after much years, so many years of worship and celebration, and especially knowing that there is so much information out there.
And where are some of those places that we can get more information, and how do you think people can get a little more information about the faith? Like last year I had a conversation, so I now know that spiritual Baptists erect banners, not flags, and just those things to say, okay, well, we have a lot more information so that we can be a little more hand in hand with our brothers and sisters of the spiritual Baptist faith.
So I am so happy that you asked that question because it allows me to bring to light that we have authors among us. Reverend Dr. Teacher Hazelland Dipisa is one of those authors, and we have a few other authors, and so she would have wrote numerous books, but for those two, when you're talking about getting to know a little more about the faith and getting the correct information, two of the books that she would have written that allows that particular information is My Faith, Spiritual Baptist Christian, which can be sourced from the secretary of our Herman Paris Southland School of Theology school, as well as a thesis, Correcting Misconceptions, a review of Caribbean Studies thesis on spiritual Baptist faith, also written by Dr. Gibbs de Pisa. And that, of course, that's an ebook, so you can get it online from Amazon, from Knowles and company. So, you could get that as well online. And of course, there are others who would have done previous interviews that are available in the archives online.
I like the fact that you talk about correct information. Sometimes what some persons say is that because the faith can be so decentralized, which is one of the things that would have helped it survive and flourish during the time, but that may be one of the things that may be the reasons why you may not be getting the same information from different people. What's your thoughts on that?
Decentralization, yes, that would have kept us. I really believe that was part of the reason why we continue to flourish despite the trials and despite the persecution in the day. But you're quite correct. Because of decentralization, and you have coming out of the spiritual Baptist, just like other religious organizations where you have different sects of one particular organization, you have other breakaways. So sometimes it can be a little cumbersome to get accurate information when it comes to the spiritual Baptist faith, because of course there are people who look like us, they dress like us, quite similar to us, their worship is similar to us. But of course, and so you would tend to bracket them all as spiritual Baptists. However, our beliefs makes us different. And so because of that, it's very, very difficult to really identify a spiritual Baptist unless you really belong to the faith, or you would have done proper research in terms of who the spiritual Baptists are and what we believe.
And I like the fact that you raised the point of, say, someone may look like you, they may dress like you, and that brings to mind the question, what are some of those symbols of the faith that you say, okay, well, these are very specific to the spiritual Baptist faith?
And so for us, we call them implements, and you would be talking about things like the shepherd rod, things like the luta, the tarrier, the oil, candlestand. So those implements that we use, and all of those implements are symbolic. They represent, for instance, the candlestick and the candlestands. So it represents the light. The candles represent the light in us, which should be Christ Jesus, because we know he is the light of this world. And so the candlesticks and the candlestand is just a representation of Christ in whom we serve, and a reminder to us as spiritual Baptist Christians that we ought to always have our light shining. We ought to always be that light in this dark world. We ought to always be a good example, so that when men look at us, they can see, listen, there goes a child of God. There goes a Christian man or woman. There goes a person that serves Jesus Christ, who is the light.
And we want to thank you for shining that light, shedding that light. We take a short break and we come back. We're learning from teacher Dierdre Mitchell. Stay with us. We come back with more. Welcome back, and we are talking about symbols of the faith with teacher Dierdre Mitchell. And teacher Dierdre, just the vibes from hearing some of those implements, because I grew up West Village, the drumming, and knowing that there's so many spiritual Baptist people in my neighborhood, in my community. So sometimes I play in drum in church, sometimes I played in a Baptist feast, and talk about the uses of these implements, tools as it were, to bring us a little closer to Jesus Christ. Thanks.
So one of the implements and one of these tools, as you would put it, I think for me, my most preferred is the oil. And of course, as I said, all of these implements are symbolic. They are representation of Christ in our lives. And so those things we have the drums, and not every spiritual Baptist use the drums, but the drums, they are representation. It's music, it's instrument, it's accompaniment for worship. It doesn't mean that if a church does not use the drums, that they cannot worship. Of course, they can worship even if they do not use the drums, because it's just for accompaniment. Others would have the harp, and they would have the cymbals, and they would have the tambourines, all of those things. But for some spiritual Baptists, they use the drums. And in terms of the oil, has always, since in the days of old, been used for consecration. It has been used for anointing, to set aside. And so we continue to use it for the same, to set aside, to consecrate, to put even sometimes some of these implements, to set it aside for a particular use. And so all of the other implements, all of the other instruments, we have the shak, again, accompaniment for worship, accompaniment for music. And we know that sometimes if we listen to a person who sings a cappella, it may sound a little bit different if you have music accompanying it. And so for these drums and the shaks and the tambourines that are used, those are used for worship and for accompaniment. Opposed to, as I said, like the oil that is used for consecration, that is used to set aside a chosen vessel, a chosen person, chosen man or woman of God. And then we have the water. We know that Jesus is written that he's the water. He is water, gives us life, like the woman at the well. When she went to the well and she saw Jesus there, and he told her that, listen, if you drink of me, you shall never thirst. So again, it's all symbolic and a part of who we are.
But sometimes you find those chosen vessels and those consecrated to Christ, they find themselves in a lot of discrimination, the stigma. So what are some of those things that have been still challenging or a little less challenging now as the faith evolves and as the community grows?
So for discrimination, I think for spiritual Baptists, I know for me personally, one of those things that are very discriminating that you can't seem to shake is that some has the concept that spiritual Baptists are uneducated, and in this day and age, in this dispensation, that is furthest from the truth. We now have teachers, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have authors, we have engineers, you name it, we have servicemen and servicewomen. So we face that discrimination. I remember one time going on a job interview. And so my head was uncovered at the time, and the interviewer would have read my CV, my curriculum vitae. And then I did not place my religion and on my resume. And so then they asked about my resume, my religion, after the interview had ended. And one just asked about the religion, by the way, and I said spiritual Baptist. And instantly their faces it just fell as though they were so disappointed. And so that discrimination, our children face that discrimination. We as adults, we continue to face that discrimination as spiritual Baptists still in 2022, unfortunately.
And in 2022, I think last year we spoke to the first female hijabi, because you mentioned servicemen and servicewomen, and I think the fire service, they had their first person wearing a hijab in the service, head tying in the workplace. Have things changed somewhat, even though you're still talking about that? Is it the same tooth bagay all over the place? What does the landscape look like to your knowledge?
So head tying in the workplace, and it's funny that you would ask because recently among our youth, we would have had a discussion where one of our young people, she was facing that sort of discrimination in her workplace, and where, her boss would have been adamant that he didn't want her wearing her head tie unless, of course, it was for a specific or set aside period. And so while there are mainly government organizations and very few private institutions would allow for us as women to wear our head tie, we still have a long way to go in regards to fighting that battle, because it seems as though it's something that's not good. It seems as though it's something that would cause a negative impact within the workplace. So while there are organizations that allow us as women to wear our head ties, not just for worship, but as everyday wear, as a part of our attire, as a part of our daily lives, we still have a long way to go.
But still in having a long way to go, and with the 3 minutes we have, I want to ask, what would you like to see happen within the faith and externally? And this is even though I think from some reports that I heard, there are people who are gravitating to the faith a lot more because they're finding life in it. So what are some of those things that you'd like to see?
So for us as spiritual Baptists, we have evolution. We have evolved from who we were when I would hear stories from our elders, and that would be the older men and women in the faith. So evolution has taken place. Now, as I said previously, we have servicemen, servicewomen. We have people who are in prominent positions now, and they are finding comfort, and they are comfortable in themselves now as being spiritual Baptists, opposed to years gone by where you would want to hide that you're a spiritual Baptist. Now these people in permanent places and in situations are proud to say, listen, I am spiritual Baptist. So when you're looking now, we recognize, okay, it's no longer the spiritual Baptists of old. You have young women, young men who are in university. We have our schools now, we have a primary school, we have a theological school. And so the faith has continued to evolve. And because of the evolution of the faith, more people are running towards the faith opposed to running away from it, because now they are seeing the spiritual Baptist in a positive light.
And with that, I'm also looking at the fact that women hold such prominent roles, and the faith is so comfortable and is very different to some other faiths that, yes, look at Christ, but at the same time, it seems as though that level is uneven. So what are your thoughts on that in this last minute that we have?
And so, women are the live wire of families in most instances. Women are mothers are the one that holds families together. And you would always hear that if a mother dies, the family falls apart, unless, of course, they have a very strong, deep-seated foundation. And so it's the same for the spiritual Baptist faith. Ideally, and I don't have the exact statistics for this, but however, we have more women than we have men in our faith, it seems like. And so the women are the one that, we no longer just assistants in the church, but women now in the faith are in leadership positions. So you have women that are alongside leaders who are leading flocks. You have women who are teaching in the church. You have women that generally now are taking up arms with the men of God and walking with them. Of course, understanding that our men continue to be the head of the home and the head of the church. But however, women now in this dispensation, we are able now to function at a higher level, at a different level, openly. And of course, so intrinsically as well, because we are the backbone of what makes us who we are.
And that is a beautiful point for us to end this conversation. So we want to thank you so much, Teacher Dierdre Mitchell, mother, teacher, looking at symbols of the faith on this Spiritual Baptist Liberation Day. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of all the team, TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you for joining us.